Now, how many of you are looking for guidance and trying to figure out your next step? Well, our next speaker looks back on his life and sees how God connected all the dots for him, which taught him to depend on God to direct his path. Welcome, James Johnson.
I was running errands for my Navy commanding officer one day. While passing the cruise lounge, I suddenly heard loud laughter. I heard one shipmate say to another, "You are crazy. This is not the only church that's going to be saved. There's lots of them out there. Why this one?" The shipmate, being bullied, responded, "Well, why don't you join me in Bible study?" And he further explained Matthew 16:18 and questioned them by asking, "Why would Jesus Christ save any other body of believers or church besides the one he built and died for?" Initially, I kept walking, but I had to step back to see who was speaking. 3 days later, I see him in the hallway on the ship. This time I stopped. I stopped to ask him about this church and why he was making such a bold statement. I was 20 years old then, about the same age as some of you watching and listening today. I started my praying journey at the tender age of 12 years old. I would pray for guidance, help, and support with graduation. But most of all, I prayed that God allowed me to know the truth, his truth. But more on that later. So you're probably wondering why I'm up here on this stage telling this story. I'm sure there are a lot of you at this point are ready to start your life or your careers. Maybe you want things to happen faster in your life. Maybe you want God Almighty to act quicker on your behalf. But please allow me to tell you why practicing patience will give you the best experience that God Almighty has in store for you. How do I know? Because when I think back and look back in that ship's passageway, I know for certain it was God Almighty who led me to that pivotal point in my life. So let me back up for a second. At the age of 12, a lot happened in my life. My father died. I joined and was baptized in a non-denominational church. And I started my praying journey to God Almighty wholeheartedly. I didn't know what I was praying for, but I would always ask for him to lead me to where I needed to be in life. By 14, I was already thinking about my future. I would pray that God help me pass my state-required high school exam so that I can get out of Georgia and leave and grow professionally. Ironically, it was the same year I failed the math portion of it. But I kept praying. So much was happening around me. I had neighborhood friends and or family members stealing and going to jail. Some were in fights and killed. Some killed others and were jailed. Seeing all that, I continued to pray to God Almighty. I continued to pray that he leads me to where I needed to be in life. Finally, I graduated at the age of 17. And I started college. That did not work out so well. I was not ready. So I worked a few part-time jobs. That was not satisfying. And then 19 months after graduating from high school, I decided to join the United States Navy. I kept praying for God to lead me to where I need to be. Then I started to see all the pieces come together through prayer. After basic training, I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. At that time, there were 576 U.S. naval ships in the fleet, 403 in which I could have been assigned to. Remember how I said I heard and saw a shipmate speaking about his church so passionately? Well, that man was Brother Paul Anjali Sr., a member of the Church of Christ. He invited me to Bible study in church, but due to my ship schedule, I could not attend. After hearing Brother Pauline speak about his faith, I was introduced to 7 other religions. I practiced Catholicism. I have attended holiness and Pentecostal services. I even studied with a Mormon shipmate and a few others. While trying these other religions, I kept praying that God leads me to where I need to be and strengthen my faith. One by one, God Almighty allowed me to cancel those other religions out. During this time, Brother Pauline persistently invited me to worship service in church. And finally, after 3 months, I gave in and I attended worship service. I started my 28 lessons and was baptized in the Church of Christ at the age of 22 years old. I had prayed for so long, it took 7 years to get that answer. Every success and every failure led me to that moment in that breezeway. I'm forever grateful and thankful to God Almighty for leading me to where I needed to be to hear his word. I could have been anywhere on that ship. I could have been walking around aimlessly, playing my Walkman. Do any of you know what a Walkman is? There were hundreds of people on that ship, but God Almighty allowed me to hear Brother Paulin talk about his faith. And that's what happens when you believe in, trust in, and rely on what God Almighty can do for you. I know this because he did it for me. And just thinking about it makes me even more grateful for his love and his kindness. The lessons from God didn't stop there. I was still in my 20s when I joined the Church of Christ. And like many of you, I was a little impatient and way too anxious about my life. I just needed to learn complete patience and wait on God Almighty to act. Like when I was praying to God to allow me to continue in the Navy and be assigned close to Georgia, but not in Georgia, I wanted an assignment in Florida, but my detailer refused to give me an assignment in Florida for almost a year. So I took action. I prayed constantly and poured my heart out to the Father regarding the purpose and intentions for wanting an assignment in Florida. My career counselor and I even traveled to D.C., but still, there was nothing available in Florida for me. So we thanked him and we left his office, and as we reached the exit door, we heard, "Hey, come back." We turned around and we met him in the passageway. He asked, "What location do you want?" "I have Jacksonville, Mayport, and MacDill Air Force Base." I'm stunned. I'm shocked. My career counselor said, "MacDill Air Force Base, he'll take it." I can probably keep going with instances and stories of how God has shown me the importance of praying to him and trusting in him to act. I've been in multiple dangerous situations and terrorist activities while assigned overseas, but simply because I prayed for safety, God answered and kept me safe. I sometimes look back at the moment when my father died. I pray earnestly to God Almighty to lead me to where I should be. It didn't happen right away, 7 years. But I find it a true blessing for God Almighty to lead me to that one ship, that one Church of Christ member who I just happened to overhear. I'm certain that had I not prayed wholeheartedly to our God Almighty, as a child, I would be a victim of society. I would be without hope and without God in the world, Ephesians 2:12. The world was harsh then, when I was in my 20s, and even more so today. I often try to understand why things are happening, and I'm sure many of you are doing that right now. So if I could talk to my 20-year-old self, I would say, stop worrying. Stop worrying about all the things. Let God handle this. There's no need to bottle up any unnecessary situations in this life. I would tell myself, James, focus and pray. Prepare for all the snares and traps that Satan set before you. Ignore all the sideshow distractions because there will be many in your journey. Above all things, James, pray, pray, pray. Believe in, trust in, and rely on what God Almighty can do for you. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Your story definitely reminds us that although the journey that we are on at times might seem difficult and filled with uncertainty, God will indeed provide guidance and light to all of us, like what is written in Psalm 119, 105. Your word is a lamp to guide me and a light for my path.